After weeks of collecting supporting documents, collating, and writing, your application for NBIF research funding is finally complete. As you send it off, you're perhaps thinking, yes, this one is a slam dunk success. So imagine the disappointment if, a month or two later, you get back a rejection letter. What happened behind the closed doors of that funding review panel? What influenced their decision? This podcast attempts to demystify the NBIF review process by looking inside it from start to finish. The decision to open a funding round begins once the provincial government allocates money to the NBIF to invest in a specific initiative with the intent to create certain defined outcomes. Using this as a guideline, the NBIF staff then define the criteria by which applications for this funding will be chosen in order to create those desired outcomes. The number of selection criteria varies, from 5 to 10 usually, and generally includes things like scientific merit, the capacity of the applicant to do the work, and potential commercial opportunities. The application form is then structured around these criteria to ensure that we collect the information needed to adequately address each point. Once finalized and translated, the application, selection criteria, and description of the funding opportunity are shared on our website. We also send the information to administrators at each New Brunswick research institution to distribute amongst their staff. We then seek out a panel of reviewers who can commit to helping us evaluate the applications. Our reviewers are people with deep technical expertise and personal experience in the applied research space. When possible, we exclude reviewers who work at one of the institutions submitting applications in order to avoid potential conflicts of interest. Most of our reviewers will be in New Brunswick, but occasionally we bring in an outside voice to enrich the conversation. The review panel is normally composed of 5 members and generally includes an NBIF team member, as well as a representative from the New Brunswick Department of Post-Secondary Education, Training and Labour. The review panel is always anonymous, and we will never share the names of our reviewers with the applicants. These reviewers also sign non-disclosure agreements and must agree to keep confidential all the applications that they review. Once all the applications are received, NBIF staff collate the applications and securely share them with the reviewers via our application portal. We have a process for reviewers to self-disclose any potential conflicts of interest and thus recuse themselves in the applications that they review. All reviewers read every application. The amount of time they have varies depending on the individual and the length of application, but is usually between 30 and 90 minutes per application. In other words, they don't have very much time, and thus they may not be able to check all the secondary details in your application like references and hyperlinks. For each application, the reviewer gives a numeric score between 1, the lowest score, and 10, the highest score for each of the selection criterion, keeping notes as they go to explain these scores. We normally allow 4 to 6 weeks for the completion of this process and the scoring of all the applications. Once the reviewers have finished reading all the applications, they share their scores and notes with the NBIF and we compile them together. To account for possible skew amongst reviewers, we apply a statistical normalization to their scores. This consists of the following steps. Firstly, for each reviewer, we create a total score per application by summing up the scores from each selection criterion. Secondly, we add together all of a given reviewer's total scores and calculate the mean and standard deviation of this set. This enables us to calculate a Z-score for each application. Finally, using this Z-score, we rescale the total score to give a value from 0 to 100, centered on 50. We average the normal total scores from all reviewers to give a final score per application. Using this final score, we make a ranked list of the applications from highest to lowest. Considering the amount of funding requested for each application versus the total funding envelope available, we move down the rank list until funding is exhausted and draw a tentative approve-reject cutoff line. Our staff highlight all the applications where the reviewer's scores are divergent, and we then share this ranked list with the review panel. The reviewers and NBIF staff then meet together in a final alignment meeting, typically 2 to 4 hours long, in order to discuss this ranked list. Using the list as a starting point, we discuss first the applications with divergent scores and try to understand with the reviewers why their scores were so different. Via this discussion, we seek clarification and attempt to bring the scores closer together, as the reviewers can adjust their numeric scores throughout the meeting. After reviewing all the divergent applications, we resort the ranked list and align as a group on the final recommended list of applications to be approved and rejected. This recommended funding list then goes to our directors, our CEO, and/or our board for final approval. As soon as possible after the final approval, and usually within a few days of the alignment meeting, NBIF staff send an unofficial email confirming results to administrators at each institution. Then, we start writing the official notice of decision letters for each applicant and finalize their award in our application portal. This process is time-consuming because we use our notes from the review process to write feedback for each applicant on the reason for the scores given and the decision made. Nevertheless, we aim to finish this process within 2 to 3 weeks. The feedback for the applicant is placed into their file on the application portal, and the NOD is sent to the applicant and their institution. As this podcast shows, the NBIF funding review process is a complicated and time-consuming process, and every application is subjected to a rigorous and diligent review. I hope this has given you some insight into how the applications are judged, and thus helps to demystify the NBIF review process.